At our daughter's wedding, my husband suddenly said, "I'm leaving Emily." Laughter stopped. His voice was cold, rehearsed. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The champagne flute trembled in my hand, its golden contents catching the light like something holy, sacred, delicate, about to be desecrated. I barely felt the stem between my fingers. The world hadn't stopped spinning, but it had changed its rhythm. Slower, louder, meaner. We were standing under an arch of white roses, the scent thick in the warm evening air, mingling with the buzz of cicadas and the soft clink of glasses. Just seconds before, Lily had tossed her bouquet, laughing like she used to when she was 5, spinning in the backyard in her yellow tutu. Her cheeks were flushed from joy and Prosecco. Her hand was in Jacob's, her new husband, their fingers already woven like they'd been doing it for years. And I was happy. Tired, yes. Exhausted in the way only a mother of the bride can be. But proud. Fulfilled. And then Daniel opened his mouth. "I have something to say." The way he said it, too composed, too clear, it cut through the merriment like a scalpel. I glanced at him, thinking perhaps he wanted to honor Lily, to say something sentimental. He had tears in his eyes. That's what fooled me. The tears weren't for the moment. They were part of his performance. And then the sentence dropped like a blade. "After today, I'm leaving Emily." The second half, "We've been growing apart for years, and I need to be honest with myself and with everyone," was just white noise. The words didn't register, not in any real way. Not when the first sentence was still echoing inside my chest, cold and hollow like the sound of wind in an empty room. The guests froze mid-sip, mid-bite. The laughter died. The only sound I remember clearly was Lily's sharp intake of breath, a sound I had heard once before when she broke her arm falling off the monkey bars in 3rd grade. Shock, pain, helplessness. I turned to look at him. Really look. His jaw was tight, his posture stiff. There was no remorse in his eyes, no flicker of panic or hesitation, just conviction. He had practiced this, rehearsed it, likely in the mirror, perhaps with someone else listening. I felt nothing at first. No anger, no grief. Just silence inside my skull, like all the wires had been cut. Like the part of me that could feel had been vacuum sealed for later. I looked at our daughter. Her lips were parted, her eyes wide, searching my face for some reaction, some cue. But I had none to give. Not yet. I didn't collapse. I didn't scream. I just stood there steady while everything else crumbled. And beneath that stillness, something ancient stirred. Something slow, methodical, and cold. Something that did not forgive. The days that followed felt like living inside a glass box. Everything visible, everything echoing, but nothing truly touching me. People texted to ask if I was okay. I said yes. Neighbors dropped off casseroles like I was freshly widowed. I thanked them, smiled, placed the dishes in the fridge untouched. I let the world believe I was fragile, stunned, retreating. In truth, I was sharpening. Daniel's absence barely left a dent in the house. He'd already been emotionally gone for years, like a faded outline in a photograph. His sudden move to a hotel felt less like an exit, and more like the final act of a long play he thought he'd directed flawlessly. He sent me divorce papers with the clinical swiftness of a man deleting an old email account. "We've become roommates, not lovers." That was the line he gave me. Not an apology, not a confession, a label. As if reducing our marriage to a domestic arrangement would soften the blow. As if detachment excused betrayal. But there was something off in the way he delivered it. A practiced cadence, like he'd rehearsed it in front of a mirror, or worse, another person. So I paid someone to confirm what my instincts were already whispering. When the private investigator delivered the report, I didn't sit down. I stood at the kitchen counter, thumbing through the pages like they were pieces of evidence in my own murder trial. And they were, in a sense. Page after page of time-stamped photos, receipts, surveillance footage. Daniel entering a condo building on Tuesday nights. Weekends at a lake cabin I didn't even know existed. Cozy dinners across town. And then, the name. Claire. It felt like biting into a fruit and finding it rotted from the core. My best friend. My daughter's godmother. The woman who stood beside me through postpartum depression. The death of my mother. Lily's first heartbreak. The woman who toasted my marriage with tears in her eyes and helped Daniel pick out my 20th anniversary necklace. She'd been screwing him behind my back for 2 years. Suddenly, every shared laugh, every hug, every girl's night flickered in reverse and turned to ash. Her hands on my back as I cried over Daniel's coldness, knowing they'd been on him the night before. The betrayal was surgical in its precision. This wasn't a love affair. It was an execution. Hatred wasn't even the right word for what bloomed in me. It was colder than fire, quieter than rage, a sort of sacred wrath. I didn't yell. I didn't break anything. But I felt a clarity I hadn't known in years. And I knew one thing for certain. They were not going to walk away clean. I chose the living room deliberately. Afternoon light pooled across the hardwood floors, warm and deceptive, casting long shadows from the tall windows. Everything was in its place, just like always. Cushions fluffed, photo frames wiped clean, the scent of lavender polish still lingering faintly in the air. But beneath the order was a battlefield. And I was ready. Daniel arrived 5 minutes late. He always liked making people wait. It gave him a sense of control. But today, his delay only gave me time to steady the war inside my chest. He walked in like a man who believed he was winning. Tan, rested, fresh from a week of guiltless hotel breakfasts and Claire's homemade manipulation. He looked around casually, like he'd forgotten this used to be his home. "I really hope we can do this with dignity," he said, smoothing his shirt cuffs like a diplomat arriving at a peace summit. "No need to turn it ugly." He thought I was still the version of Emily he remembered, the woman who smoothed over tensions at dinner parties and apologized for things she didn't break. I nodded once. Of course. I handed him a small black flash drive. "Before I sign, I want you to watch something." He raised a brow, then shrugged. "Okay." He pulled his laptop from his leather satchel, still the one I bought him for his promotion, and plugged it in. He didn't look at me while the screen loaded. But I watched him. Watched the shift in his jawline as the first clip rolled. Grainy footage of him entering a boutique hotel in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, then again on Friday. And again. My investigator had been thorough. The angles, the timestamps, they told a story Daniel couldn't rewrite. Next came the screenshots. Reservations made in his name. Emails. A cozy selfie with Claire at a lakeside cabin dated 3 weeks before the wedding. Then, the crown jewel. A voice recording. Claire, laughing, bright and unguarded. "She's so clueless. I almost feel bad." That's when the blood drained from his face. He clicked pause, then again, and again, hoping, perhaps, that the content would change. "I made copies," I said, my voice even. "My lawyer has them. If this divorce isn't handled exactly how I want, full alimony, the house, Lily kept out of your mess, I'll send it to every guest at Lily's wedding, every client, and Claire's husband." He turned to me slowly. "Claire's husband?" "Yes. You're not her only secret." He opened his mouth, but only a breath came out. Then the facade cracked. The posture wilted. He sat down hard, like the gravity in the room had doubled. His hands trembled on his knees. "I ruined everything," he whispered, eyes wet with a kind of sorrow too late to matter. I handed him a tissue, steady as glass. "Not everything," I said. "Just your fantasy." The silence was different now. It wasn't the brittle silence of shock or the heavy hush of heartbreak. It was clean, deliberate, a kind of peace that didn't beg for attention. The kind that came after the storm, not because it had ended, but because you'd walked out of its path and built something stronger in the quiet beyond it. The divorce decree came in a cream envelope, signed, stamped, final. No arguments, no revisions. Daniel hadn't dared push back. Not after the flash drive. Not after the quiet look I gave him when I said, "You'll give me what I ask, or I'll give the world what you've done." He did. Claire's husband received his own little package. No note, no return address, just the files. Evidence curated not to destroy blindly, but to expose precisely. I imagine he opened it at his desk or on his phone in bed beside her. I imagine her face when she realized what he knew. Her Facebook was gone by morning. Daniel's firm parted ways with 2 clients by week's end, an architecture board member and a luxury developer, both of whom had attended Lily's wedding. All it took was a whisper at the right wine-tasting gala. A few clipped sentences, a raised brow. His name became less of a brand and more of a warning. But I said nothing. No interviews, no emails, not a single breath of explanation to anyone. I didn't need to. The truth has its own voice. It travels in silence, sharper than screams. When Lily came back from her honeymoon, glowing and still sunk in the euphoria of a new life, she asked about the divorce. Her eyes were cautious, careful not to pry too far. "We grew apart," I told her. "It was time." She didn't press. Maybe she knew more than she let on, or maybe, mercifully, she didn't. And I wasn't ready to lay that truth on her shoulders, not yet. Not while she still looked at her father with that hint of little girl reverence. She'd learn in her own time, in her own way. My revenge didn't need her as collateral. I moved into a house by the lake, modest, warm, with windows that opened to blue skies and evenings that glowed gold on the water. I bought canvases, oils, brushes with bristles so fine they whispered across the surface like breath. I began to paint again, not because I needed distraction, but because I had room to create something of my own, unshadowed. Some people think justice shouts, that it needs to be loud, public, explosive. But real justice doesn't shout. It waits. It watches. And when the moment comes, it doesn't flinch. It simply arrives, sharp, silent, and absolute. And then it turns, with quiet dignity, and walks away.